His hands were cold, but he didn't mind. Inside the gym, the air was still and old, like it had been waiting years to be disturbed. The sound of rain touched the roof like fingertips against glass light. Patient, unhurried, Dirk stood quietly near the three-point line. He didn't speak, just positioned his feet, drew in a breath, lifted his arms, released. The shot spun through the air in a slow arc, its curve too soft for a world that liked its angles sharp. It clipped the net with a whisper, barely a sound. Already, he was reaching for the ball again. He wasn't practicing, not really. This was something gentler than practice, something quieter, almost like a prayer. Few knew his name in Wurzburg. No scouts sat in the bleachers. No applause followed each swish. It was just a boy, a ball, and the echo of his own movement. He liked it this way. Dirk wasn't fast. He didn't leap like the others, didn't scream with each make, didn't chase applause. The gym didn't need to see him love the game. The game already knew, and maybe that was enough. In these moments long after his teammates had left, long after the sun had disappeared behind Bavarian rooftops, he found something that didn't need words. A rhythm you feel more than you. Here, a quiet determination that never had to raise its voice. It wasn't just about being great. It was about being true. Dirk was tall, too tall, some thought gangly, not yet strong. His body felt like a question he hadn't answered yet, but that shot it was sure. Over and over, he'd release it, with that same odd softness, like he was setting something free. His arm hung in the air just a little longer than it needed, too almost reverent. Others chased speed. He chased detail. He didn't yet dream of the NBA. It was far a word from another continent. He had no map for where this was heading, but still, he showed up. Between trumpet lessons and handball games, between afternoon chores and family dinners, his parents had given him roots. Wurzburg had given him quiet. Basketball gave him a sense of feel. He didn't want to shine. He wanted to understand, and the curious thing was without ever announcing it. Without ever demanding it, he began to become something rare. Coaches didn't know what position he played. Guards were faster, centers were bulkier. Dirk didn't fit. He floated somewhere in between. But when he shot, the ball obeyed. And yet, even then, no one predicted greatness. What they saw was a polite teenager. Musically gifted, soft-spoken, slightly awkward, kind. He held doors open, gave interviews in complete sentences, and thanked everyone after practice. There were no headlines, no bold declarations, but there are some players who don't arrive. Suddenly, they don't burst onto the screen. They don't thump their chests. They unfold. And Dirk Nowitzki was unfolding, quietly, gently, almost imperceptibly. No cameras zoomed in. No magazine covers were printed. But the wind already knew his name. He was building something slowly, a movement, a way of being, a stillness, within the storm and far across the ocean. In a world of bright lights and sweaty arenas, a league didn't yet know that one of its greatest artists was already painting, not with words, not with power, but with peace. The fog rolled off the hills in slow, steady breaths, tugging at the rooftops of Wurzburg. Morning settled softly over its narrow streets, where church bells tolled the time with tender indifference. Inside a modest house, Dirk laced his shoes. Basketball shoes, not yet. These were for tennis. Tomorrow, maybe the trumpet. Some days, it was track. Other days, not much at all. He wasn't in love with a game. He was in love with movement, with variation, with silence. Around the town, people began to notice that the Nowitzki boy was tall, too tall to be ignored. But Dirk tried, in his own quiet way. He didn't brag, didn't bark for attention. He preferred to wander, to test things, to pick his curiosity up and set it down again, like a stone warmed by sunlight. His parents had their own legacy. Helga Nowitzki had played for the German women's national basketball team. His father, Werner, had dominated handball courts with a kind of fire Dirk didn't quite inherit. Their footsteps were marked clearly, but Dirk walked beside them, never in them. It wasn't rebellion, it was something softer, a search dot. Sometimes he practiced with the team, sometimes not. When he did, he looked out of place, his arms too long, his timing off. Coaches watched him run and shrugged. They couldn't quite place him, couldn't tell if he was serious. Even Dirk wasn't sure. And then, one afternoon, a different kind of figure walked through the gym door. Holger Geschwind had the posture of a professor and the eyes of a philosopher. He was a former player, yes, but he didn't wear that loudly. He approached the game like a question, not a conquest. He didn't give drills, he gave riddles. Dirk listened. At first it was just conversation, then shooting, then strange drills involving music and math and gravity. Dirk's friends smiled politely. Some rolled their eyes. Dirk didn't care. There was something in the way Holger spoke, like the court was its own language. Together, they began to build something unspoken. A studio, not a gym. An experiment, not a regimen. Holger told him to shoot until the rhythm felt like a metronome. Told him to study the angle of his elbow, the breath between his dribble and release. He told him to watch birds to see how they pivot without breaking stride. To listen for the breeze inside the basketball's spin. Dirk was too polite to say it, but he had finally found someone who understood. In their gym, there was no shouting, no counting of reps, only sound the swish of the net, the throaty echo of the ball hitting worn-out wood, the occasional murmur of Holger's voice, offering a chorus of poetry disguised as instruction. "You are not here to play like them," Holger told him once, gesturing westward. "You are here to become who you already are." Dirk didn't need more than that. Something in him steadied. He still wasn't fast, still wasn't strong. But now, when he shot, there was a meditative certainty. It wasn't confidence, not exactly. It was closer to understanding other teenagers. His height tried to dominate the game with power. Dirk tried with touch. Most didn't notice. There were no scouts camped outside the gym. No rankings to track. Just two quiet figures, one old, one young, sweeping the gym's corners with their minds. And slowly, subtly, something began to bloom. He learned patience. He learned to let the game invite him in. Dirk stopped rushing. He stopped trying to prove he was something he wasn't. He let awkwardness linger, let discomfort teach him. Every missed shot told him something. Every good one didn't earn a celebration, just a nod inside those walls. Expectation quieted, and in its place came something quiet and strong. The townspeople still knew him as the tall boy who helped carry groceries, who played the trumpet with surprising elegance, who did well in school and never asked for praise. But on certain evenings, after the rest of the team had driven home, a handful of janitors and lingering parents might have heard it. The rhythmic hum of the net giving way. The sound of a future beginning to shape itself not in shouts, but in silence. Dirk would always remember those nights, not for what they promised, but for how they felt. Simple, sacred, slow. The airport was loud, too loud for a boy who liked empty gyms. Dirk stepped off the plane, clutching a duffel bag that held more nerves than clothes. The Texas heat wrapped around him like a dare. Bright signs flashed names he didn't recognize. Everyone moved fast. Everything sounded sharp. He didn't speak much English, just enough to find his luggage. Just enough to smile and nod when someone offered help he didn't understand. He hadn't come for interviews or headlines. He had come because someone, somewhere, believed he might be something more. Dallas, a city he hadn't asked for, and yet one that had quietly opened its arms. The locker room didn't feel like home. The court didn't feel like his. He wore a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, shoes a size too small. His hair was longer than most, his presence smaller. Reporters glanced past him. No questions, no real expectations. He smiled politely then, disappeared into silence. There were nights, he cried. Not loud tears, just the quiet kind that show up when your apartment is too empty and the food doesn't taste like home. He wandered supermarkets holding boxes he couldn't read, speaking softly to himself, practicing English beneath breath he barely had. Team dinners were overwhelming, practices confusing. He missed Holger, missed the math, the poetry, the comfort of understanding here. Basketball was louder, harder. It wasn't art, it was battle. And Dirk, he wasn't ready for war. His muscles ached. His chest felt tight. Every missed shot felt like proof he'd made a mistake. Some nights, he thought about going home. But each morning, without fail, he showed up early, always early, before the trainers, before the other rookies. While the gym still smelled like dust and yesterday's sweat, he was there, standing at the arc, releasing, watching, listening to the ball talk back. The coaches noticed, eventually, that he didn't complain, that he always stayed late, that even when he was outmatched, outmuscled, overwhelmed, he remained. The city didn't know him yet. A few fans might remember a tall kid from Europe, who shot too much for his size and didn't smile like American stars did. But slowly, quietly, he began to translate, not with words, but through motion. His teammates didn't quite get him, but they respected the hours. They respected the silence he carried, the stillness in his routine. Something began to click. A soft jumper from the wing, a reverse layup after a long stride, a block, even here and there. They weren't wins, not yet, but they were signals, flickers, glimpses of the thing inside him trying to breathe. Don Nelson, the coach, gave him more time, more responsibility. He was criticized for it, told the kid wasn't ready, told it didn't make sense. Dirk heard the whispers, the laughter, the articles, but he didn't argue, didn't explain. He just kept arriving early. One dribble, then a spin, then a fade, again and again. Back in Wurzburg, his mother called often. His father asked if he was sleeping. Holger wrote him letters, long ones, about gravity, about jazz, about how the shot didn't need to look normal to be real. Dirk kept them all. In those first years, Dallas asked a lot of him. Too much, maybe. A foreigner with a funny name, a strange game. He wasn't loud, wasn't electric, but he stayed, and something in the air began to settle around him. The gym felt less foreign, the ball a little more familiar. He wasn't a star, not yet, but the city had started to listen. Not because of his talent, because of his sincerity. The court lights hummed faintly, like pollen in the air. It was early, too early, the kind of hour nobody chose, except for those still chasing silence. Dirk stood alone in the gym, sweat already beginning to gather at his brow. His shirt was soaked before first whistle. No music played, no voices echoed, just him and the soft rhythm of shoes gliding against floorboards. He wasn't built for confrontation, but he was beginning to understand its necessity. The league didn't care about subtleties. It didn't care that he saw the game differently. It wanted strength, fire, confidence that could fill a room. Dirk felt none of that. He only felt the need to keep going. Teammates were skeptical. Coaches, unsure. Commentators broadcast their doubts like headlines. Soft, not ready, a failed project. They didn't always say it out loud, but he heard it between sidelong glances, the empty praise, the quiet where encouragement should have lived. Still, he came early. Still, he stayed late. When others left the court, he added sets. When others celebrated, he studied. When others doubted, he didn't fight back. He just returned to his form. Pivot, elbow, flick, over and over, until the sound of his own release drowned out their doubt. And when the lights finally dimmed, he walked home alone past restaurants full of fans who hadn't yet learned his name. But things do change, even if slowly. His shot head at first began to find the bottom of the net more often than not. His legs grew stronger, his shoulders held steadier, and the whispers, they wavered. By the early 2000s, the league didn't fully understand him, but it began to watch, begin to wonder, begin to talk less about his nationality and more about that impossible fall-away jumper he kept reaching for. The move was unorthodox. Backward, off one leg, high release point, but it worked over defenders' hands, over fear, over doubt. It wasn't a weapon, it was a shield, a gesture of belief that no one else need believe in to be true. Beside him stood Steve Nash, a blur of energy and optimism, and Michael Finley, steady as granite. Together they laughed, teased like brothers, anchored each other. They didn't chase drama, just chemistry, just momentum. Dallas began to look different. Not just because of the wins, though those did come, but the way the team moved, the way they trusted each other. And at the center, Dirk, no longer foreign, just ... foundational. He didn't become a star all at once. There was no crowning number game where everyone suddenly saw the light, but the applause grew louder, the jerseys in the stands more frequent. And still, Dirk barely celebrated when he scored. He ran back, he focused, he kept building, because deep down, he knew something the others didn't. This wasn't yet the destination. It was still part of the ascent. But not every climb is easy, and not every fire is external. He began to shoulder more weight, more responsibility, more blame. With each loss, he absorbed the silence of fans who weren't quite sure he could lead. With each win, he passed credit elsewhere. And then 2006, a season like a soaring bridge, hard-earned, unified, fragile and golden. Dirk led the Mavericks all the way through the storm, past doubters, past giants, past his own former shadows. It felt like destiny. He finally stood at the edge of it, 2 wins away from a title, and the game that had once given so freely began to take. The arena lights were bright, almost too bright, not in their color or intensity, but in what they promised. Banners hung motionless above the court, like chapters waiting to be written. Dirk stood by the scorer's table, eyes lifted, but not to the crowd. He was searching for something quieter. Maybe the rhythm he'd brought with him from Wurzburg. Maybe the version of the game that felt like music instead of war. This was different. This was the finals. Dallas had made it. Not in some distant future, not in some imagined dream. It was real now. The Mavericks were here in the championship series, and Dirk, quiet and deliberate, was their beacon. Against them stood Miami, flashy, physical, fast, led by a young Dwyane Wade, bursting with gravity-defying confidence. The Heat played, with a rhythm more like a siren than a whisper. But for a brief, flickering moment, Dallas lead 2-0. Dirk was steady, poised, not dominant like others, but definitive in his touch. Fadeaways from the high post, trailing threes. Calm leadership from a man who never yelled, only guided. It felt for a moment like the universe was finally whispering back to him. But then, the shift in Game 3, with minutes left and a commanding 13-point lead, the Mavericks faltered, not collapsed, just ... loosened, like a shoelace slowly coming undone. Miami surged. The crowd in South Beach roared. The momentum slid from Dallas's hands like water. Dirk's face never changed, but something inside him did. In the post-game press conference, he answered politely, took the blame like always, said, "We missed our looks, though many of them were his." He didn't mention the calls he didn't get, didn't gesture toward the free throw disparity, didn't add weight to the whispers already beginning around the league. The next games blurred. Whistles echoed louder than swishes. Wade went to the line again and again. Contact often barely visible. Advantage palpable. Dirk kept shooting, kept leading with his eyes and hands, not his mouth. He hit big shots, hit impossible ones, but it was as if the floor kept tilting. Underneath him, Miami didn't steal the series. They swallowed it in slow, unstoppable gulps. By Game 6, it became clear. History was turning away from him. He still fought. Wade kept coming. Dirk reached back into childhood, into the hours spent, shooting alone, trying to find the thread, the magic. The quiet confidence he had threaded through every step of his career. But the thread snapped, the buzzer sounded. No confetti fell. Dirk walked off the court without a word. No fists slammed. No tears shed on camera. He gave no quotes that would lead the morning shows. All he did was disappear into the belly of the arena in the hotel room. He sat for hours, just sat, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much and couldn't find a place to put it. He didn't call home. Holger didn't send congratulations. There were no flowers, no parades, no silver linings offered. Only silence and the dull ache of almost this, he knew, would define him until it did. Because in that quiet room beneath the hum of Florida air conditioning, Dirk made a choice. He did not demand a trade, did not romanticize escape. He would not run to Los Angeles. He would not join Boston. He would not beg for a trio or a fourth. He would not leverage Dallas for more. Instead, he stayed. He told the front office, "Rebuild how you must. I'm still here." Because loyalty, like his game, wasn't loud. It didn't ask to be applauded. It asked only to be believed in. The league moved on. The media crowned others, and Dirk. He returned to the gym. Same shot, same tempo, same silence. They called him cursed at worst, irrelevant at best. But legacy, true. Legacy doesn't skip chapters. It reads every one, even the heartbreaks, especially the ones that don't become highlight reels. And somewhere in all that pain, in that faraway finals loss, Dirk planted a promise, not a revenge tour, not a redemption arc, just a single, steady vow. Next time, if it ever came, he'd be ready. The lights stayed on in the practice facility, even when the stands went dark. Dirk would arrive before the sun claimed the sky and stay long after teammates had showered and left. The team had changed. Some left for bigger contracts, others traded away in cautious rebuilds, but Dirk remained. There were no headlines to write now, no playoff buzz, no MVP discussion. It was quieter than ever. Years stretched between hope and heartbreak. But in that stretch, Dirk grew into something rare, a player loyal not for sentiment, but for belief. He believed in the game as a sacred act, and Dallas, imperfect and often unkind, had become his church. Some called it pride, others foolishness. Stars across the league assembled elsewhere, super teams built seemingly overnight. Suddenly, rings mattered more than roots, applause louder than alignment. Players moved in search of noise, Doc stayed for the silence. Holger still flew in, still watched with a poet's eye, still whispered through shooting sessions, adjusting his elbow by degrees. They would sit on empty benches, studying game tape like scholars instead of athletes. The angle of a pivot, the geometry of a curl, not for perfection, but for peace. Dirk didn't chase virality, didn't seek to trend. There was no documentary crew, no cameras following his footsteps, only janitors, sometimes pausing to watch the tall man moving like clockwork in the morning. Shadows. He wasn't chasing legacy. That word felt too heavy. He was chasing clarity, in motion, in stillness, in form. His minutes were still high. The team needed him, but his name rarely led post-game stories anymore. Younger stars filled the nightly scroll. Dirk, meanwhile, became an old song you didn't hear at parties, but still played quietly in early hours, when you needed reminding of what used to feel whole. The Mavericks struggled, missed the playoffs, lost leads. Cycles began and ended around him. Coaches came and went, but Dirk kept to his ritual. Same hallway walks, same shot chart, same locker stall hung with silence and sweat. Through it all, he never asked out, never questioned aloud. He kept showing up. Injuries came slower now, but lingered longer. Ankles that once absorbed contact without complaint began to throb through back-to-backs. Shoulders stiffened between quarters. He'd wake up before sunrise and feel like falling back asleep, but he didn't. He never cut corners, because peace, he'd learned, earns no shortcuts. When local reporters asked if he still had championship dreams, he smiled slightly, answered with something vague. But in his private notebook sand, he kept them. He scribbled small hopes underneath. Stats, one more run, one page read. If it comes, he wasn't bitter. Not even at 30, when most legends feel bitterness begin to brew. He watched others win, watched banner-raising ceremonies on TV, watched parades win through cities that hadn't waited half as long as Dallas had. And he nodded, still and proud, because he wasn't chasing a trophy, he was becoming whole, and it happened slowly, silently. Each year brought new teammates, few from all-star ballots, most from waivers and second chances. But Dirk welcomed each by name, offered quiet encouragement, tapped shoulders after missed free throws, laughed more in practices, became lighter. He trained the same, but carried himself differently. There was less hunger in his jawline and more ease, confidence, not urgency. He didn't resent the past, didn't weaponize it. He absorbed it through losing streaks and quiet March road trips. Dirk taught the game not through sermons, but by stillness. His kind of leadership didn't shout in huddles. It lingered in routines. In silence, he grew. Louder by the end of 2010, he was no longer doubted. He was no longer questioned, but he was still waiting. And he didn't know it yet, but not far now, across those very same hardwood lines, where he had built rhythm like religion, the wind was beginning to turn. It started quietly, as it always did with Dirk. There was no preseason buzz, no grand predictions, just questions. Could Dallas make one last run? Was Dirk too old, too loyal, too patient? The roster didn't dazzle. It didn't make headlines. This wasn't a super team. This was a patchwork quilt stitched from overlooked corners of the league. Jason Kidd, nearly 38, with joints that creaked but a mind still razor-sharp. Tyson Chandler, known more for energy than elegance. Jason Terry, a firefly in sneakers. Sean Marion, the slinger of strange shots and quiet stops. But together, they moved, ... like something had finally settled into place. Like a long-held breath had finally exhaled. At the center of it, Dirk, not louder, not different, just ... distilled. Season melted into playoffs. Dallas moved past Portland, past the defending champions in Los Angeles, swept them, in fact, with the kind of calm ruthlessness that made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. And Dirk, he was impossible in silence. Shots floated from the corner of the sky, turning gravity into a polite suggestion. Double teams came. So did 48 points. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Then came Oklahoma City, young, explosive, future-heavy, but Dirk wasn't playing their game. They jumped higher. He shot quieter. They flexed. He turned away, took the contact, and hit anyway, again and again. As the Mavericks moved to the finals, the narrative shifted. Could Dirk do it? Became what if Dirk always had it? It wasn't revenge. It wasn't redemption. It was return to purpose, to peace, to poetry. Miami waited. New stars, this time brighter, bigger. LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, talent stacked like storm clouds over the Atlantic. But Dirk didn't prepare to stop a storm. He prepared to walk through it. Game 1 went to Miami. Loud, the arena shook with speed and spectacle. It didn't matter. Game 2, Dallas answered. Down by 15 in the fourth. The story seemed old, until it wasn't. Dirk led them back with that same drop-of-water patience. Took the game without ever grabbing it. He broke a tendon in his finger. He didn't break rhythm. They tied the series by Game 3. He was sick. The flu. Fever over 101. His face pale, body loose with weakness. He could barely lift his arms, except when the shot needed him. In the fourth quarter, alone again, he scored. When it mattered. And when it didn't, because that's who he was. Game 4. More of the same. Close, nervy, every possession a pendulum, and again Dirk rose. Alone, quiet, sure. Dallas won back-to-back games, and now they stood on the edge again, like 2006, but nothing like it. Dirk had changed, not grown harder. Just more, ... himself. The series returned to Miami. Game 6, tension like a held note. Miami flashed again, heroics, fast breaks, highlight moments. But Dallas never blinked. Dirk missed shots early. He didn't panic. Let silence fill the cracks in. The second half, his rhythm returned like a friend who'd been waiting just outside frame. The fadeaways came, the footwork, the breath before release. Dallas pulled away, and in the final minutes, the world began to understand this wasn't an upset. It was an arrival, delayed, deserved. The buzzer sounded. Dirk didn't scream. He didn't leap. He walked off court. Alone, through the tunnel, past exploding flashbulbs, past the shining lights. No attention grabbed, just a moment carried. He cried in the hallway, not loudly, just enough, years of sweat. Silence, suffering, made whole in a ring and a run that was more him than jailbreak. When he returned for the podium, the cheers were deafening, but inside him, everything was still. The seasons changed, and Dirk remained, not as sharp, not as quick, the kind of difference only the floor noticed. Where once he glided, now he paced. Where once his shot floated, now it worked harder to lift. But even as the edges of his game softened, the essence of it only deepened. He still came before practice began, still stayed after it ended. Young players passed through the locker room, some curious. Others rushed hand, found him there, sitting with feet in ice, watching tape. With a pen in hand, he didn't instruct, not directly, but he'd nod after a rookie's missed rotation. Offer a quiet, "You'll get that next time," without judgment. His leadership was never volume, it was presence. He stayed when Dallas lost, stayed when Dallas retooled, stayed when Dallas barely made the playoffs, stayed even when staying meant saying goodbye to chances he could have chased elsewhere. Other legends took farewell tours. Dirk took road trips on back-to-backs. He played with lineups that changed by the week. Coaches who came in with vision and left with regret. But every time the ball found his hands, for even one more fadeaway, Dallas stood still and watched. One night in 2019, he stood on the court at home, waved gently to the crowd, and said thank you without needing the microphone. The fans didn't cheer right away. Many just cried, because they understood they weren't saying goodbye to greatness. They were parting from something much rarer. Longevity without ego. Excellence without hunger for more. And some time after that, after the last walk through the tunnel, after the locker was emptied and the shoes were shelved, the city gave him something back. Outside the arena he had shaped, beneath an open Texas sky so wide it swallowed sound, they placed a statue, not huge, not intimidating, just honest. It showed him mid-fade, 1 foot in the air, arms stretched skyward. The ball paused in flight, somewhere between memory and reverence. No confetti, locked in bronze. No roaring dunk, just the silhouette of a man who never demanded to be seen, and yet was impossible to ignore. People came by at dusk just to look at it, not for selfies, just to be quiet with it. Some touched the base as if it could speak. Some stood at a distance, hands in pockets, letting the breeze tell the story. Dirk never asked for a statue, never mentioned the idea. When he was told, he simply smiled and said, "Thank you. That's a big honor." But maybe it wasn't a statue for Dirk. Maybe it was for all of us to remember a time before noise was required, before ambition overwrote steadiness, before talent had to be loud to be seen. Dirk wasn't easy to define, not in an era of categories. He didn't belong to position. didn't belong to trend. He wasn't a prototype. He was a reminder that grace matters, that you can lead without shouting, that sometimes the quiet ones aren't missing something, they're building something deeper. And now, generations later, children walk past that statue and ask their parents, "Who is that?" They don't point to rings or records, they point to the way the shot is held, the angle of the fade. They tell stories about patience, about loyalty, about brushing your teeth and showing up on time. Legacies don't have to echo loud to last sometimes. The ones that stay, really stay, begin as a whisper. And in that whisper, Dirk Nowitzki became something more than a basketball player. He became a language, and Dallas spoke it forever.